Sio Nagata. We're really happy to have you here today. And we're very happy to have a discussion today about what's happening with the new regulations for the Indian Arts and Crafts Act and how it's impacting more than just the arts sector. It's impacting small business. It's also impacting Native producers. And so I want to introduce Erin Parker. She is currently serves as the Executive Director of the Indigenous Food and Agricultural Network Initiative, at the University of Arkansas School of Law. And she supports the initiative through program development, research and writing and analysis of legislative and regulatory issues affecting tribal governments, businesses, and individual producers. Before beginning her work with the initiative, she worked as a staff attorney and research coordinator for the Cobell Commission, a national working group convened by the Secretary of the Interior to repair the federal government's Indian land trust management system. Erin holds both her JD and her LL.M in agriculture and food law from the University of Arkansas. And we just want to welcome you and thank you for being with us today, Erin.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you for hosting this and opening this space for us to chat a little bit about what's going on with the Indian Arts and Crafts Act proposed regulations. I'm really excited to be here. We're really trying to get the word out about these so that people have a chance to weigh in if they have thoughts or opinions on the process, and there's still time for that. So this is a great time to be having this discussion. I know I've got slides that we'll get going. So welcome, everybody. We're going to be chatting a little bit about the Indian Arts and Crafts Act today. I know Pamela has hosted previous discussions on this, focusing on existing arts and crafts regulation. We're going to be talking about the possibility of agricultural products being brought under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. That's what our topic's going to be today. Before we get going, I'll give you a little bit of an outline if we want to go to the next slide. So we're going to start out with just a tiny bit of background on the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, and then talk about this current proposal that the Bureau of Indian Affairs has out to regulate foods under that framework. So we'll look at what's happening now with the proposed revisions and what tribal food producers should know right now. We'll also talk about some existing protections that are already out there for tribal food products that can be something that tribal producers could go and avail themselves of right now without any additional protection or regulation from BIA. We'll talk a little bit about where we go from here, and then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So if you go to our next slide, I'll give you a little bit of background on IFAI in case you haven't heard of us. We have been at the University of Arkansas School of Law since 2013. We turned 10 this year. We were founded in 2013 by two incredible Indigenous attorneys, Stacy Leeds, who's a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and Janie Sims-Hip, who's a citizen of Chickasaw Nation. And we were founded really to be a resource for all 574 plus tribal nations in the space of food and agriculture. So as tribes are expressing their sovereignty in the space of food and agriculture, we provide free resources to promote diversified economic development through agriculture, support cultural food traditions in Indian country, all through that lens of tribal sovereignty. And one of the things that we do, on the next slide, you can see a document that we put together on what's going on currently with the Indian Arts and Craft Act regulations. The link here or the QR code on your screen will take you directly to our policy analysis and regulation of native produced ag products under the IACA. And if you want to read the whole report, it'll be there. We're going to cover a good bit of ground on it today, but that link will be handy in the presentation if you want to check out the whole document. If we go to the next slide, we can chat a little bit about what's going on. So the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was passed in 1935, and I think a lot of folks here may already be familiar with that just generally. This is a truth in advertising law. So this is a law that Congress passed to protect Native artists and Native craftspeople from anybody who is fraudulently selling arts and crafts products in the marketplace and saying that they are Native made or Indian made when they are not. It really is designed to make sure that we're protecting the ability of Native artists and craftspeople to make a living from their products so that those products aren't being devalued in the marketplace by copies that are being produced by non-natives and claimed that they're native. So, if there's a product that's being sold and it's claimed to be Indian jewelry, but it's not made by a person who is a citizen of a federally or state recognized tribe, then that is a violation of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. That's a fraudulent representation in advertising. And so that person who is not native, who's marketing their product that way, could be subject to either civil or criminal penalties under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. So there's some strong protections for native arts and crafts. And currently, right now, that means things like jewelry, pottery, beadwork, baskets, rugs, dolls, clothing, textiles of any kind, all of those kinds of things have to be marketed truthfully. And so that's what this law was really designed to protect. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening right now. Currently, the state of the law is that this protects arts and craft products. Right now, BIA is proposing to also bring agricultural products under the scope of what could be protected by the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. And on the next slide, we have a few more points that I want to make before we really start digging into what's in the proposal draft. So before we get going, I just wanted to do some stage setting. First of all, if you want to read the draft revisions that we're talking about today, there's a link here in the slides, and we can share those, I think, now and after the presentation so that people have that link handy if they want to read through the whole proposal that BIA has out. That is there in that link. And I also really wanted to make it very clear, just we don't want to make anybody panic today. We do have some concerns that we're going to be talking about with bringing ag products into the Indian Arts and Crafts Act the way that BIA is proposing right now. However, what we're talking about today is all just a draft. This is not something that is in effect right now. It is not definitely going into effect. It is a discussion draft that BIA put out earlier this year so that people could discuss it and talk about it and offer comments to the BIA about what they think about the discussion draft. And there's still time to weigh in. We'll talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about next steps and what measures people can take if they do want to weigh in right now about this draft. And we'll talk a little bit about the actual official process for proposing a regulation. This isn't even an official process. So if you're a nerd like me and you monitor the Federal Register, I look at that every week to see what the government is doing and what they're proposing to regulate. You may know there's a really long process that they have to go through by law when they're updating regulations like this. This isn't even that official process yet. This is the pre-step to that official process. So just a draft, nobody panic. But that said, we do definitely want to get the word out about this so that people do have time and opportunity to weigh in if that's something that they would like to do. So just want to make that very clear about what is going on right now and what's the state of the law at the moment. So just a draft, and I'll probably say that quite a bit during this presentation, just in case anybody joins late. I don't want anybody to panic and think that this is happening and they need to be worried about it immediately. So with that, and thank you for sharing the link there. I know people had asked about that draft. So here's what BIA has proposed. There's a really long list of what BIA is calling artisanal and craft, agricultural and beverage products that could potentially be included under the Indian Arts and Craft Act framework. And remember, the goal of this act is to protect Native livelihoods. It is to protect Native people from fraudulent misrepresentation of any kind of product, currently an arts and craft product, in the marketplace. So the idea of this is that it's about protection. The products that they've listed are pretty broad. It pretty much covers anything and everything that you would think of as a food product, anything for human consumption. I won't read the full list to you. It's pretty long, but I'll hit some highlights. This really covers everything from things like raw agricultural products, which would include like fresh fruits and vegetables, or even coffee beans or berries. It includes traditional food products like wild rice or corns. Some even traditional herbs or medicines like sweetgrass are specifically named in here, as well as sage. Meat products, whether those are beef or buffalo, bison, pork, chicken, other poultry, what have you. Fish is included, spices and teas, dried food or processed food, value-added products like jams or jellies. All of these things are included in what could potentially be regulated in what BIA is proposing under this draft. So it is pretty broad, and the draft does make it pretty clear that all of the products that they've listed in these subsections that I'm quoting are specific examples of products that if somebody out there in the marketplace was saying that they were native made and were not, they could be subject to criminal penalties or civil penalties under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act framework. Definitely a great goal to protect native food products, right? And I know that there are, when Pamela and I were chatting about what we wanted to cover in the webinar today, I know that she mentioned that they've done a survey recently where, you know, it was about what should be covered under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. What would be, how broad do native artists want it to be? And that there were, you know, responses that included food products considered to be art. And so definitely want to honor that before we really get into some of the problems with the draft regulation. It's a great goal to protect those and absolutely understand and honor the definition of those products as art. However, the way the draft regulation is written, we just saw some problems with the practical realities of the way agricultural products are produced currently that create a little bit of a problem with regulating them under this particular law as it's written. So we're going to get into those next. If you want to go to the next slide and talk about maybe what native producers should know and what's going on right now. Really, the discussion draft is leaving a lot of unanswered questions as far as we see it. And that's what we covered in our policy brief that we put out. There's several questions. We want to know, in what cases would a native produced food product just be presumed to be native made? And I'll explain what all these mean in just a second. We also want to know in what cases a native produced food would need to be certified by the Indian Arts and Crafts Act board and process. We also want to know what the timeline for that certification would be. So if a native producer is going to have to seek certification from BIA to be able to market their product as native made, what's the timeline on that? And finally, you know, just generally what we saw from all of this is that this draft really creates uncertainty and kind of an already uncertain livelihood for native producers. Agriculture is a pretty uncertain space. Producers have to deal with unexpected weather events, unexpected pests or disease that can impact their crops, that can impact soil health and waterways. There's already a lot of uncertainty when you're growing or raising or harvesting food, and we have a little bit of concern that interjecting more uncertainty here through regulation that's technically designed to protect but may actually harm native producers is not really the best way to go about protecting those products. So I'll talk a little bit about what those questions actually mean if we want to go to the next slide. The way that the draft is set up, there's a legal presumption that's created for a lot of products. So for example, today, if there was a native artist who was making jewelry and they're making that jewelry by themselves, they are marketing that product as native made and following the current guidelines for the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, that product's probably going to be presumed to be native made. And that's really important because it means that that person, that artist, does not have to file any paperwork. They don't have to actually seek a certification under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act from BIA in order to be able to keep marketing their product as native made. And that's really important for agriculturalists because we know that native made ag products are really usually considered niche products in a lot of market spaces, especially value-added products. In international markets, they can often, for example, fetch a higher price point when they're marketed as native made. So native producers may find it's really important to their economic livelihood to be able to market their product as native made. But if they need to seek a certification, they probably want to know, hey, what do I have to apply for? When do I apply? How long do I have to wait to hear back from BIA before I'm able to continue to market my product as native made? If I can't market my product as native made, how does that impact me financially? Or if I continue to market my product as native made and I don't have that certification and I needed it, am I going to be subject to regulation under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act? Those are important questions. And I think the draft leaves them a little bit unanswered so far. There have been a couple of listening sessions the BIA has done on this, and through some of that dialogue, I think BIA has indicated they probably didn't mean in the discussion draft to indicate that every single ag product would need to be certified. I don't think that was their intent, which is good. But the regulation's a little bit confusing. So that might be one of those things, if they were thinking about publishing this and actually making this an official proposal of a regulation, they might want to think about tweaking that language a little bit to make sure that it's pretty clear that there is a presumption for native made ag products in certain cases, so that native producers don't have to stand in a long line to get certified before they can continue saying, hey, this is native grown wild rice, or this steak is made by a native producer, or the cow was raised by a native producer. Like all of those things that you can say on a label that you might be curious, or that you might be concerned you would have to seek certification for. That's a little bit concerning that it isn't that clear in the draft right now, but there's an opportunity for BIA to clarify that. I do think it's encouraging that they have, I think, indicated a little bit in some discussion at listening sessions that might not have been the intent. So that's kind of a mixed bag in terms of what's going on with the regulation right now. But the certification thing is really the kicker. We don't know how many products would need certification. There is a there was a discussion at one of the listening sessions with BIA about, how many products would a native producer need to get certified if they aren't presumed to be native made. So if we have a native rancher, for example, who is selling meat products, we'll say they're raising cattle, they're raising cows, and they sell a couple of different cuts of meat products from those animals. Like maybe they have a ribeye, and maybe they have a flank steak, and maybe they have ribs, and maybe they have stew meat, a couple different products. And I think there's still some uncertainty from BIA as to how many different certifications you would have to file if you do need certification. That you might have, and they indicated that you might actually have to do it by the product and not by the business, which is really concerning for native producers, because there are literally millions of native food products on the market, and that's not actually an exaggeration. There are over 80,000 native producers in what is today the US, and those are just the 80,000 producers that wanted to report in to the National Census of Agriculture that USDA conducts every 5 years. We know that there are more native producers out there. There are certainly more native people who are engaging in agriculture. Not everybody really meets the USDA definition of a farm. It leaves out a lot of subsistence folks. But let's just say 80,000 is the number. If there are 80,000 producers and each of them are producing 10 products and they all have to be certified, that's potentially 1 million certifications that the BIA staff and Arts and Crafts Board is going to have to process if this regulation goes into effect. It's a pretty small office. I don't know what the bandwidth of that office would be to process all of those certifications, which creates a problem for timeline for native producers, because we don't really know how long they would have to wait. And the longer they have to wait to get a certification before they can continue to market their products as native made, the more that may be impacting their bottom line and hurting them economically. So the certification question is still out there, I think, for including ag products in the discussion draft. The certification situation also doesn't necessarily work well for agricultural products just because of the way agricultural processing works. And I think the meat products are a really great example. So I'll keep going with that one. When you have a meat product that is being processed, like let's say just right across the border for me, there are 4 tribally owned meat processing facilities. There's one at Cherokee Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, Osage Nation, Quapaw Nation. All 4 of those nations have their own federally inspected, tribally owned meat processing facilities, and they accept meat to be processed from tribal citizens, as well as non-tribal ranchers who are in the area, who take their products there to be processed into meat products that they can then sell on the market. The Indian Arts and Crafts Act draft regulation has a component that makes it pretty clear that if in the process of like an assembly line situation, which I think the meat processing would definitely qualify, in that process, if there's a person who is a non-Indian that touches that product as it's produced, that's probably going to require certification. It probably can't be presumed to be native made. I think that makes a lot of sense for arts and crafts. I think it makes less sense in an ag context, specifically when you're talking about meat processing, because you may have a number of individuals who are working in that meat processing facility, and in order to make sure that they're complying with the regulation, and in order to make sure they can still market their product as native made, under the current draft, a native producer who brings their cattle into a processing facility, even if it's tribally owned, they're going to have to know that every single person who's working on their product that day is a tribal citizen. And they're going to have to determine somehow before they bring their cattle there for slaughter and processing that every single person who touches that product is a native person. They're going to have to do that every single time they bring their products to slaughter under the current draft. Again, this is just a draft. It's not going into effect. But I think that's one of the problems with pulling agricultural products into the arts and craft regulation, just because the way those products are produced, the way they are marketed is so different. The meat processing example is a really good one. I don't see that changing anytime soon, too. One of the reasons that there are such a diversity of people working in those facilities is that there's a big technical labor shortage in the meat processing space right now. It is really challenging to get people out to train new folks on ways to cut meats, for example, knife skills, the food safety inspection processing or food safety inspection qualifications that you need. All of those things require a lot of training. So there's a limited number of people who are actually available who have the training to work in meat processing facilities. And while that can certainly change long term, in the immediate timeline, if this went into effect today, I do think it would create quite a problem for a lot of people who are doing any kind of meat processing. That might also be the case for somebody who's doing a value-added processing component if they are using a processing facility that's not their own. And it can be pretty expensive to actually buy your own processing equipment and make sure that that is certified, like food safety or food safe, all of those things. That requires a lot of extra capital. And that may cut into somebody's bottom line if they need to get a certification because there may be non-Indians working at that facility. It's still the native rancher who has raised that cattle and has brought it to market and is ultimately selling it. But because the draft regulation doesn't really address that reality of agricultural production, where the processing may have non-Indian hands touching it, but the ultimate person actually receiving the economic benefit of selling that product is still a native person, that's going to create a little bit of uncertainty, and it potentially could create a situation where that's going to harm a native producer economically, because basically you're saying that that person has two choices. They can either keep marketing their product as native made and run the risk of subjecting themselves to civil or criminal penalties under the Indian Arts and Craft Act, or they can stand in line and wait for certification for an unknown amount of time. The other problem with the certification process in the ag space specifically is that we know the requirements that are in the draft. When you're seeking certification, one of the things that you have to submit is a business organization certification. So, whether you're a sole proprietorship or an LLC, et cetera, those things are required to submit in certification. We know a lot of native ag producers may not necessarily have intentionally incorporated a business. That is for a lot of different reasons. There are some people who don't do that because they are producing on trust land, and since income derived from trust land is not subject to federal tax liability, they may not see a benefit in having, for example, an LLC incorporated. As an attorney, I always encourage people to seek potential LLC just to protect you in the event of a lot of different things. But we know the reality is a lot of people haven't done that. They may not want to. So when you're seeking certification and you're requiring a business organization proof, that may not work right now for a lot of native ag producers. So if they do have to be certified and they get in line, they could potentially not receive a certification, even though they're a tribal citizen producing an agricultural product, because of the business organization situation. So that may need a little finessing as well. That was another thing that kind of came up in the draft that may not be a best fit for the current state of agricultural production in Indian country. And I do think that unclear timeline for certification is really kind of the kicker, because that really could cost people a lot of money if they're having to wait in a really long line. It also could potentially cause a problem for the existing artists and craftspeople who are needing certification as well, because you're putting millions of products potentially into a queue along with existing products. So what that can do is create a backlog and slow down any kind of certification for everyone else who is already protected as well. So some concerns, I think, from the regulation. That's just kind of a brief overview of sort of what's going on as far as ag products go. Again, this is definitely not something that has gone into effect right now, so I don't want anybody to panic, and we're going to talk here in just a second about what you can do if you want to comment on the regulation, or if you have comments or thinking about it. There are definitely still chances for you to have your voice heard, so nobody panic, but be aware that this is going on, certainly, because I do think that there are some concerns with the draft and that they're worth thinking about and worth hopefully BIA taking another swing at in their act if they do want to include this in an actual official proposal. So if we want to go to the next slide, we can also talk about some opportunities outside of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act to protect native food and ag products. We know that food fraud is definitely something that happens. We are unclear to the extent that of food fraud, where, for example, somebody is saying that they're marketing a native food product, but they're not actually native and it's not actually native made. There have been some calls for the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, to do a study on that so that people have a better idea of just how much of that may be going on, because it's kind of hard to regulate and protect something if you don't actually know the extent of the problem and exactly where it's happening. So I think that baseline data is really important to gather and think about before jumping into a regulatory action, because I think as here, it could run the potential of actually harming the very people that you're trying to protect. So first step may be, looking at actually doing a food fraud study and seeing what that looks like. But outside of that, there are a lot of opportunities to protect native made food products currently that are already out there. Certainly consumer protection actions are things that people can do, like truth in advertising and labeling just generally, even outside of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act may be an opportunity. But the biggest one right now is probably existing trademark protection. So the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and I've linked to their website here, they have maintained a made and produced by American Indians registered trademark for many years now, starting in the 1990s and continuing up till today. And for people who are eligible for that trademark, they maintain it at no cost to the native producers who use it. And they have quite a few products that use that product right now. So if you've been at any kind of event where native ag products are being sold, you may have seen this because it's on a lot of different products, including actually arts and crafts products. People who are currently protected by the Indian Arts and Crafts Act also use this mark currently because it is an immediate signal to a consumer that this is something that's made by a native person. And again, you get maybe an economic benefit from that you don't get if you're not marketing your product that way. IACA maintains this. Again, this is available at no cost to producers. So it's something that people, I think, should definitely check out if they're interested. If you're not already using this mark and you are growing, raising, harvesting food products, or you're making arts and crafts, this may be something that you might want to look into just as an extra marketing opportunity for you that can increase potentially your sales or your marketing reach. And I would definitely recommend that anybody who's interested reach out to IAC directly for more information on that. I put their website here, indianagfoods.org is their ag foods program, or you can go to their indianag.org/American Indian Foods. Both of those will get you to some good information, and they have staff contact info on the website as well. So please reach out if you're not already using that mark. It's a really good marketing opportunity, and it protects food products, because the only people who are able to use that are people who are, tribal citizens who are producing these foods or arts and crafts. So that's already out there and existing in the marketplace. There could also be, I think a potential for tribes to weigh in with laws and policies protecting things as well. So if there are tribal leaders out there who are thinking about expressing their sovereignty in the space of food and agriculture, you can also look at protecting your producers and products as well. There may be some legal things that you can do as a matter of tribal law and policy that could protect your tribal citizens who are producing food, even outside of BIA regulation. The next slide, I definitely want to make sure we have time for questions. Let's talk about where we go from here. So as I said, this is a draft, just a draft. It's not official yet. It's not even an officially proposed regulation yet. That means there's still time to weigh in, which is good news. BIA has been conducting listening sessions. Unfortunately, there haven't been a lot of them that have, or really any of them, that have been at places where a lot of native agriculturalists are. A lot of them have really concentrated on listening sessions and consultations at places where there are folks who are already receiving Indian Arts and Crafts Act protections, so artists, craftspeople. There is one listening session that I did want to highlight, and that is August 18th in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That will be a combo listening session, and I think it also starts with a tribal consultation. So if there are tribal leaders who want to sit in government-to-government dialogue with BIA on this regulation, whether it's about the ag products or just generally, there is another consultation opportunity. There is one happening today as well, but I think with time zones, if people are listening to this and they're in Minnesota, they probably will miss it because I do believe it's in the Southwest. However, that if there are folks who are out in Santa Fe or on the Indian market, that is happening on August 18th. If you want an in-person feedback session for BIA on this, there's also an opportunity to comment by email. So you can email consultation@bia.gov. There is a deadline on that, and that is September 1st. Of 2023. Comments need to be emailed by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So as long as your comment is in by 11:59 p.m. ET on September 1st to this email, consultation@bia.gov, it can be considered as part of the discussion on this draft. So that's the draft process. That's what we have right now. However, my hope is that because this is a draft, after September 1st, BIA will be taking all of the feedback they've received and hopefully doing some thought about it and considering maybe revisions to the draft. And then if they do decide that they want to go forward with it, they will publish it in the Federal Register. That is when it will be open for an official regulatory comment period. When federal agencies regulate in this way, they are required by law to hold a regulation open for a certain number of days for official comments. So, anywhere between 30 and 90 days, depending on what they're exactly trying to do, that deadline will be apparent when they publish it in the Federal Register. But you'll have more time once the regulation is actually published, even beyond September 1st. And we don't know when they will be doing that. Certainly, that'll be up to BIA and their internal timeline. I imagine that will depend on the number of comments they receive on this draft and any kind of revision that they want to do on the draft, whether it's about ag products or whether it's about arts and crafts. Anything like that would be published in the Federal Register in the future. And my organization, IFAI, will certainly be tracking that when it is open for comment. We'll certainly be making people aware of that. We'll share it in our newsletter and on our social channels. We'll probably also have a template draft letter. So if anybody wants to comment on the official regulation at that point and you want a place to start, we can provide a template letter that you can use and tailor with your own thoughts, but it's better than staring at a blank page sometimes. So we will offer that as soon as the official regulation is published. We're not doing it for the draft. We're kind of waiting to see what BIA decides to do, but that's where the process is right now and kind of where we go from here. A little bit more on where we go from here. If we want to go to the next one. I think we have an opportunity for questions now. If people have more thoughts about where they want to go from here or what they want to, or any specific questions about the regulation, I will be as helpful as I can.
There's quite a few questions.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people were asking about was how often do they have to recertify?
How often do you have to recertify? Under the current draft, I believe it's 3 years. You would have to recertify every 3 years.
Okay.
For the IAC specifically, that would be a question for them if you were asking about the IAC trademark. I think it's annual, but I would want you to check with IAC first.
There was another question from that someone did ask about IAC was, is that for descendants? Or is it for, or do you have to be certified and you have to be an enrolled member of either a federal or a state recognized tribe? Or is Indian Agriculture, the Intertribal Ag Council, are they only do federal because they're a federal agency? I know there's some differences that happen sometimes with that.
Sure. So IAC is, they're not an agency, they're a nonprofit organization. So they have a little more flexibility, I think, in how they operate. I don't speak for IAC, but I believe if you look at their trademark guidebook that they have on their website, it does give you all that info. I think you do have to be a citizen of a federally recognized tribe. However, I don't run that program and I don't want to speak for them. So that would be something you would want to talk to IAC about and see what options are for sure. But if you are eligible for it, it is free and a good marketing opportunity for sure. So I would definitely reach out to them.
And then Skylar had put a question down at the bottom, but it disappeared when we were talking. There we go. Can you see that, Jen? This is Jen's comment. I'm sorry, Erin, can you?
Yeah, no problem. So I'll read it for everybody who may be listening in and isn't looking at the screen. IAC currently trademarks any American Indian produced foods. A producer needs one certification for an entire operation. For organic standards, apply to a farm's produce operation and livestock operation. Could this operate the same? So I'd have one for produce, one for livestock, and maybe one for wild harvest and craft. I think, Jen, if you're asking about the draft regulations from BIA, the answer to that is unfortunately unclear. In some of the listening sessions, they have indicated that instead of certifying a whole class of products, you might actually have to certify by the exact product, which is something that worried us a lot because I know very few producers who are just putting one single product on the market. I actually don't think I know any. Everybody is doing more than one. I mean, in the case of like a rancher, for example, you might have a steak of some kind that you market, and then if that doesn't sell, the next day you turn it into stew meat. That's technically two products. And the way that BIA was talking in some of the listening sessions, we were concerned that they were thinking you would have to do it by every single product, which is a really burdensome regulation potentially for a native producer. So I don't think we know the answer definitively yet. It was a concern that came up in the listening sessions that is currently unanswered from BIA.
There was another question from Kelsey. It's not just meat processing that requires a large team of people that may come from different backgrounds. Oh, there we go. He put it up for us. Thanks, Skylar.
Yeah, so if a non-native person is working for a producer and waters a squash plant, what does that mean for certification? This is a great example, Kelsey. It is absolutely not just meat processing. And we know, I know any number of native farmers who are growing fresh fruits and vegetables who have farm help and farm labor that are not necessarily tribal citizens, especially seasonal hires. And so right now, the way that we read the draft, that would require you to be certified. It means that you can't be presumed to be native made. You could probably still get it certified, but the question there is, how long does that take with all the other products that are probably going to be certified? I think, if BIA in the draft had instead maybe made it clear that that's something that you could just presume is still native made, because it's still, it's your garden. You're the person who made, you're the person who's receiving that economic benefit from that product. Not necessarily the people who are working for you on your farm or in your garden, whether they're being paid or volunteer. And those people being non-native doesn't necessarily remove it from being a native product, but that is kind of the way that the draft is written. So it's a little confusing, and that was definitely one of the concerns that we had.
We also had another question from Jan. Could a producer waiting for certification have pending certification?
That's another great question. I think that would be another way if BIA, does want to proceed with pulling ag products under this regulation. That would probably be a good framework to consider, considering the number of products that will probably either need to be certified or may want certification just to fully protect themselves. That doesn't really have a feature in the draft right now, but I do think it's a very good idea if BIA wants to do anything like that, where you could still sell your product, you would just put pending certification, and that would cover you from any legal liability or financial liability. I think that'd be pretty important. I will say, just if I were a lawyer for an individual producer, I would still be frustrated for you if you were my client, because I feel like having to put kind of a tentative, like pending language on there from a marketing standpoint, I don't know how consumers would react to that. And if there were any negative impact from that, I would be frustrated with the BIA for doing that, because I do think it's unnecessary. So I think it's possible. I know, Jen, I saw your question too about whether or not this is voluntary. I don't believe that this would be voluntary. They say that it's voluntary to seek a certification, but my problem as an attorney is I don't think something's really voluntary if you can be regulated for it and you can be subject to a fine or a criminal penalty if you don't follow the regulations. So if they do want to make it voluntary, and BIA did say in some of the listening sessions that they would consider this to be voluntary, I think that there are some opportunities for them to clean up the draft and make it clear that this would be a voluntary process and that Native producers would not be penalized if they did not seek certification, but want to continue marketing their products as Native made.
We have another question from Samantha. If ag products are perishable, there, he put it up. Thanks.
Yeah, if ag products are perishable, how would the certification process work as far as timeline? This is another reason, Samantha, this is a great comment. This is another reason why we were a little concerned with the draft, just because of those realities of ag production, right? While, I think philosophically, there are definitely ways to consider ag products as art. There's an incredible amount of care and time and labor that goes into growing, raising, harvesting foods, stewarding lands to be able to do that. We know that. However, ag products are perishable in a way that a lot of art products that are currently protected under the Arts and Crafts Act are not. Jewelry and pottery and beadwork, these are things that are going to be able to last. They're shelf stable. They're not subject to deterioration or anything if they sit on a shelf for a while. But somebody who's growing fresh fruits and vegetables, somebody who is harvesting wild rice and bringing that to market, those aren't things that can just sit, forever. Like that's something that a Native producer really needs to be able to immediately still market their product and get kind of an immediate answer. Right now, we don't have an answer for that in the draft. That's one of those unanswered questions that I think is still on the table for BIA to consider if they really do want to pull ag products under here. It's just that very different nature of an ag product. Let's see, Deb asks 2 questions. Is the main benefit of certification for international marketing? Would the certification include seeds grown and have a geographic and cultural significance, for example, Bear Island flint corn or Hatasis shield beans? Yeah, so for certifying, the way that the draft is written, the certification, the way I read it, it would be something a Native producer would want to do if they were going to keep marketing their product as Native made, because otherwise, whether you're marketing your product domestically or internationally and you're saying it's Native made, it could still be subject to regulation under the Indian Arts and Crafts Act if you haven't followed that process. For the IACA trademark specifically, if you were looking to use that, I would say that there are benefits economically to that, whether you're marketing domestically or internationally. I know IACA does a lot of work helping Native producers reach international markets through trade shows, but there are also a lot of products that are, I think, using that trademark that are also domestic and still seeing economic benefit from being able to use that trademark if that's something that you qualified for. So either way, I think that would be something that could be of economic benefit if you were thinking about the IACA trademark. That one is voluntary. That IACA is not a federal agency. They're a nonprofit organization. That's just a service that they offer to Native producers. So that one's voluntary. If the BIA draft regulation went into effect, however, they say it's voluntary. I don't really think it's voluntary, but.
Well, and here's another question. What changes would you recommend BIA make to the current proposed regulations?
That's a good question. Let's see. We didn't go into a lot of detail about this because I really wanted to focus on the immediate impacts to Native producers. But if I were an attorney working for BIA, I would be pretty concerned with the current draft, the way that it is actually opening BIA up to a couple of lawsuits, both for discrimination against Native producers and it's called a takings claim. It's an intellectual property lawsuit. And essentially that would be you're creating market confusion and potentially removing the ability of all the people who are currently using that made and produced by American Indians trademark. If they are unable to receive a certification, for example, technically, if they still use that trademark, even though they're following the IAC guidelines, they would not be following the BIA regulation if it went into effect. And so they would have to stop using the mark potentially if they couldn't be certified. The Supreme Court has said pretty clearly that that kind of interference with the use of a mark is a problem, and it can set you up for something called a takings claim. So there's a potential for BIA to, I think, be the target of a couple of lawsuits from Native producers if it went into effect as written right now. So that said, if I were an attorney for BIA, I would want to make some serious changes. I would definitely want to make sure that what they're saying is a voluntary process is actually a voluntary process. I would also want to clean up the certification timeline. I mean, some of the things that people have already suggested here were definitely top of mind for me as well, like pending certification opportunities for anybody who does have to be certified. I think the easiest thing to do, to be honest, would just be, the easiest thing to do would be to not bring ag products under this regulation, because I do think that the nature of agricultural products is just so different from what's currently protected under the IACA that not only does it potentially harm Native producers, it's also, I think, going to impact Native artists because you're putting millions of items into a queue without enough staff support at BIA to really be able to actually certify and protect them, and that hurts everybody. So if the goal is really to protect Native producers, then if it were me, I might back off this a little bit, maybe rethink it, do some consultation with tribal leaders and more consultation with tribal leaders, and really specifically try to go to places where I knew Native agriculturalists were going to be. So food sovereignty summits, the IAC's series of regional Native producer conferences that they have all over Indian country, their annual agriculture conference, where there are hundreds of producers there. Those are some really great places to actually get FaceTime with Native producers and chat about this and talk about what they need and how it would actually help them or not. Those are things that I would rethink and do. But the big thing, beyond that, if they did want to proceed with this, I would want to make it really clear that a lot of these products could just be presumed to be native made. And I would want to clear up that assembly line issue, because agricultural production is just so different from the way that art products that are currently produced are made. So those realities, I think, require a little bit of reformulation.
There's another question from Jen. There we go.
Let's see. Does the Arts and Crafts Act include arts and crafts that are not traditional, like paintings or needlepoint? Would this apply only to traditional foods? Yeah, so I won't speak to the arts and crafts side of it because I'm an ag lawyer and I don't want to get that wrong. I know that there are, part of the reason that this draft is going around, we're focusing on ag products today, but as Pamela and I were chatting beforehand, there are plenty of ag product or plenty of artworks that are not necessarily covered right now, right, Pamela?
Yep.
Yeah, so there are things out there that aren't covered that probably need to be, and this is a great opportunity for BIA to make sure that those things are protected. When it comes to ag products, it's not just traditional or culturally appropriate foods. The way that this is drafted is extremely broad, and because it does include things like raw agricultural commodities, that does include, your spinach would be covered, pork and chickens are specifically included as well. So this is really broad. If it did go forward as written, it would certainly include those things.
Nikki Crow has an additional question, and you may have covered it, but it might be good to just cover it again.
Yeah, what is the difference between this certification or volunteer program and the IAC trademark? Yeah, this is a great question. So the IAC trademark is actually 100% voluntary. IAC is a 501c3 nonprofit. They're not a government agency, so they're not going to require you to do anything. Legally speaking, that's just a completely optional thing that you can do if you want to apply for that mark and use it on your products to give yourself an economic bump and have your product easily recognized by consumers as something that's native made. The BIA revisions, that would be a legal requirement. I know that they're talking about, BIA has been talking about it as though it's voluntary, but again, I don't think something's really voluntary if you can be regulated and subject to penalties under it for not complying. So that would be a legal requirement. If they went into effect as written today, right now, that would be something that everybody would have to comply with. And certainly, you know, I guess the good news there is that hopefully there would be people out there who are not native and marketing products that are food products as native made that could be regulated under it, which is great. But I think the unfortunate reality is that the way it's written, it would also catch a lot of native producers or create a lot of uncertainty for native producers. So the certification process, that would be a legal requirement through BIA. The IACA trademark, totally voluntary, optional, just a marketing tool.
So from going forward, we did put the link in, and we can put it in again for people to make comments to consultation at BIA. And those have to be in before the 1st of September. And the other piece is that you said that you would be sharing something like a sample draft for comments. And if we could get a copy of it, we would make sure that we would get it out to the people. We could get it posted, you know, on our social media, but we could also get it out to the groups here in Minnesota, the Indigenous Farmers Group. And oh, there's another question, but just wanted to add that Samantha has a question.
Samantha says, I see the draft is well intended, but hopefully this process has opened BIA's eyes to how complicated it would be to bring native produced, harvested, and value-added products into a law that never had foods in mind when it was drafted. If they're serious about this, it might be better to pass a separate law entirely. Yeah, just personally, I agree with you very strongly. I think, you know, and it's funny because BIA actually in the past, this has been brought up, and BIA in previous administrations, there's actually, if you look at our long policy brief, there's a quote that BIA in past years had said they actually would decline to include these kinds of products under the IACA framework because they didn't feel like they had the authority from Congress, that wasn't the intent of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. So this is a little bit of a departure from previous BIA stances on ag products. I also think, you know, that there would be things that would, you know, maybe benefit. You would usually see like a USDA or maybe even FDA doing this kind of work, but it's a little unusual for BIA. So I agree with you. And I know we've got a couple other comments and questions, so I don't mind answering those if you want to hang out, Pamela.
Yeah, and Erica has a question about legalized marijuana.
Yes, Erica says, Minnesota has just legalized marijuana. Can cannabis products be designated native made even though federally marijuana is still not legal? Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I would think under a federal framework, you might not be able to get that. So if this regulation from BIA went into effect immediately today as it's written, which it hasn't been, it's still a draft. If it did, I don't think you would be able to get that through certification. You might be able to get it to be presumed native made and just kind of go forward with it as long as you're marketing it only in Minnesota. But I don't think a federal entity could legally certify it as native made unless it was decriminalized at the federal level. That's my guess. I have not done any research on that, so that's not a definitive answer, but that's my gut feeling on that. I don't know what that would look like outside of the BIA framework, though. I don't know what it means for like individual trademark protection. I think if you're marketing it within Minnesota, where it is legal, you might have some state level trademark opportunities, but that'd be something you'd want to talk to about a lawyer who is actually licensed in Minnesota, because I don't want to overstep, but that's a good question. And I know we've got a couple more. Let's see. Nikki says, it's odd. What if I wanted to sell a product without saying that it's native made as a tribal member? Will I be subject to certification? Yeah, if you're not making any claims about the product being native made, doesn't apply to you. So you could just keep on marketing your product and selling it. If that's the way you're already doing that, then no change to you. The only change would be to people who do want to say that a product is native made. And I think that there has been a lot of economic benefits, people being able to do that. So, that's a potential economic harm that could come to native producers. But yeah, if you're not marketing a product that way now, no change. Nikki also asked if there would be hemp added. I don't know what BIA will do on hemp products. This covers products for human consumption. So if there are any hemp-derived products that are for human consumption, it would be covered under here, the way that I read BIA's language. But a lot of hemp products that I'm aware of that are on the market now are not for human consumption, so this probably wouldn't apply to them. So those are good questions. I know Jen asked if we could get language, or if you're talking about like a template, yeah, we can get a template out. I think we were planning to hold off until the regulation was official, but if people want a draft now to respond to this draft, fine to do that, and we can share that with Pamela so it gets out into the world.
I think you answered the question that Mary has a question and Erica has a question.
All right.
Yeah.
Mary asks how much of this is supported and pushed by non-negative big ag and producers to keep competition out by a growing market. Yeah, that I don't know. I'm not really sure what BIA's specific justification for it is, and I don't want to speak for them. I mean, native produced products is certainly a huge market, 3.5 billion every year by native producers just in raw agricultural commodities. That's not including value-added processing. So, agriculture is and continues to be an incredible enterprise for Indian country. So I don't know what the answer to that one is, but I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to weigh into BIA with comments still. So.
And I know that you answered the question, but Erica is asking about seeds.
Seeds specifically, I don't see seeds included in the language that BIA has put out on this right now. My gut is that unless they change the language, I don't think that seeds specifically would be included, nor would seedlings, unless they're for human consumption. So the only way that I could see that, because that seems to be the kicker in the way that they've included it, is a food created for human consumption. So since if you're planting the seeds or you're saving the seeds and they're not for people to eat, then I don't think that they would be included here. And the seedlings would be the same way. The only exception to that would be if you had papitas or something that you seeds that you were actually roasting and selling for people to eat. But otherwise, for seeds that you're going to plant or save, I don't think they would be covered here.
And did you answer Nikki's question about hemp?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. These are great questions. I'm really glad to be able to chat with folks about it. And Skylar, if you want to put up the last slide here that has my contact info, if anybody has any further questions or wants to reach out after, these are our social channels and our website. You're welcome to reach out here, or in the next slide, you have my email, which is esparker@uark.edu. Please feel free to send any questions. If I don't know the answer, we can do some research on it and try to figure it out for you for sure.
There's one more question from Samantha.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Even outside of the processing arena, if a family is growing, harvesting produce, but some family members are not enrolled, they wouldn't be able to get certified without excluding the non-native family. I think they can get certified. I think possibly. It's going to depend on how much work those non-native family members are doing. And we still have an uncertainty about the timeline for the certification process. So I think that's another one of those lingering unanswered questions. I think that that's a really good one also that BIA really does need to consider when they are thinking about this draft as well, because there are, plenty of Native producers who may have non-Native family or relatives that are helping out or part of their operation. That doesn't necessarily mean that their products shouldn't be protected or that they're not Native made. So there's still some unanswered questions there. I don't have a definitive one for you, but my gut is maybe you could be certified if the language stands, but I think that they need to consider that going forward.
Well, we're just about at 11, and we want to thank everyone for joining today, and we will be getting information out, excuse me, to the folks in Minnesota and Wisconsin that are part of the Indigenous Farmers Group and to our partners here in Minnesota. So we'll make sure that we get those things posted and that you and the people that have been part of the Native Community Cooperative Developers training, we'll make sure that we get that to you as well, and so that you have that document for comments, because it really does help to have something to look at. And we just want to thank everyone for the great questions. And again, Erin, and we want to also thank the Minnesota Department of Ag. They're a sponsor in this as well. And we'll keep moving forward. We're planning on another meeting with regards. We're hoping that we'll have some of the people from BIA on the call to talk about the law for Indian arts and crafts. So thank you all for joining us. And Erin, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. These were great questions. It was a great chat today. If you have any other questions or follow-up, please reach out anytime. We are more than happy to help.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.